Yeah, welcome back everybody. We're now going to begin section 2 of our AWS Solutions Architect course. Now this is pretty much the beginning of the serious stuff, and as I left you at the last intro video, we're going to be going through designing highly available, cost-efficient, fault-tolerant, scalable systems. Now I've talked about this before, but if you notice at the top of your screen there's a percentage amount, and this relates to how much of the exam will contain this section. So if you hadn't already guessed, this is a very important section. It is the most important section, and it's all to do with VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. So let's get on with it. As I just stated, this is 60% of the exam, so it is obviously the most important. And if I had to put this into one coherent sentence, this is it. This coherent sentence is basically summarizing the entire course, and that is, you need to understand VPC, Virtual Private Cloud Architecture, inside out if you want to pass this exam. And I've outlaid here what we're going to be going through in this section, and it's public and private IP addresses, security groups and network ACLs, route tables and internet gateways, NAT instances, network interfaces, elasticity and scalability, elastic load balancing, auto scaling, and virtual private cloud peering. Now I've tried to break these down into unique units, however they all interrelate to each other. Virtual Private Cloud is very nebulous, meaning it all interacts with, each section interacts with the other one. And again, I'm going to say exactly what I said a minute ago, but I'm going to say it because it is very important. And again, note this important little sticker here. The best way to fully understand all of this is to design your own infrastructure on AWS and incorporate all of the concepts listed. If you can do that, you are well on your way to passing the exam. Excuse me, I didn't state that before. It's just something that I sort of stated before, but just in a little different twist on how I've said it. But again, let's just one more time. VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. That's what it's all about for the AWS Solutions Architect course, and you need to play around with it a little bit to understand it. Now, when you first, we're not going to go through too many live scenarios. Excuse me. At the bottom of this slide I've written go to VPC console. So at the end of when I explain all this, we will go to the VPC console, and it's probably going to be the first and only time that we will go to the console. The reason being, I don't think understanding how to use the console, this is the most important thing in passing this exam. Don't get me wrong, you need to use the console to be able to deploy VPCs and to do most things, but I'm not going to go in this course. I'm not going to go through and say this is how you do this on the console, this is how you do that on the console, because in the exam you won't be using the console. There won't be any examples of using the console that I am aware of at this point in time. So there are certain AWS VPC configurations. Well, there are 4 possibilities. There's VPC with a single public subnet, a VPC with public and private subnets, and VPC with public and private subnets and hardware VPN access, and VPC with a private subnet only and a hardware VPN access. Now the reason I want to show you this on the console is because it's a very good summary of what I've just said. If you go to your VPC dashboard, let's just go back one little way. Click on VPC to get you to this screen. If you don't already know how to get here from the main part of the Amazon Web Services console, I'll show you. It's pretty much down here under networking. That is VPC, isolated cloud resources, and brings up your VPC dashboard, and we are in the North Virginia region, and we will go through regions and availability zones a little later on. At the moment, the important thing is, if we start up a VPC wizard from within here, it gives you those 4 choices that I just talked about. The VPC with a single public subnet, VPC with public and private, and so on and so forth. For the time being, we will not talk too much about the VPN ones. We will later on, but at the moment we're just going to concentrate specifically on the first 2 and probably this one, a VPC with public and private subnet. And it's a little drawing that that I'll have a better drawing of. So that's all I wanted to show you. Like I said, that's probably the only time we're going to look at the console. I might possibly have a look later, but I don't have too many plans to spend a lot of time in the console. We hope to have other courses available which will explain a lot of console work. Okay, back to our slide presentation, and we'll move on to the next slide. Now, I searched high and low for the best diagrams I can out there to try and explain this concept. Something that is very, very important is subnets, which we talked about. However, it's the fact that, and it comes up a lot in the questions in the exam about the difference between public and private. So try and commit this to memory. I probably should have a little sticker here to remember. But if a subnet's traffic is routed to an internet gateway, the subnet is known as a public subnet. So that's the basic idea of why a subnet is called a public subnet. The fact that it has, let's have a look at this slide here, a connection to the internet, straight out there through the internet gateway and to Amazon S3, EC2, or wherever you want. Now, if a subnet doesn't have a route to the internet gateway, the subnet is known as a private subnet. Again, back to this drawing, we can see a private subnet doesn't have a connection out to the internet. However, it doesn't mean that you can't make a connection out there. And again, we will discuss this a little later on when we talk about NATs, but a network translation is needed to go from private subnet out to a public subnet. Oh, sorry, excuse me, out to the internet from the private. Again, try and commit this to memory, because as you'll see, the next question is along, well, that's sort of a similar line. So every now and again during the course, I'm going to pop a question up after I've explained a concept, and I've carefully chosen these questions as I think they're very, very similar to the ones that you may get on the exam. So let's read through this one. You have set up a default VPC network, and you now need to associate a public IP address to that network so as to enable access to it from the outside world, and a private IP for internal use. Which of the following statements is true in relation to these IP addresses, specifically when setting up a VPC with default settings? Do you need to manually assign both a private and a public IP? A private IP is assigned by default and you need to manually assign a public? Or is a public assigned by default and you need to manually assign a private, or do the private IP address and the public IP address get assigned by default? The answer to that, if you didn't already know it, is the last one, that they are both assigned by default. And there's the answer. The reason is, I mean, it's just basically, these are the things when you set up a VPC, the things that happen. A default subnet in each availability zone, and internet gateways created by default, mount route table for your default VPC, default security group. We will go into more detail about these later on, route tables and security groups. Default NACL, default DHCP options, and finally, the thing that gets assigned by default is a private IP address and a public IP address, which is the answer to our question. Again, okay, I said I should have put a remember on the last slide, but it seems like I'll put it here, which is a pretty good place. So when you see this little remember, it means remember it. Try and commit it to memory and understand it, because when I have the remember post-it note, it means a similar question might pop up in the exam.